If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
This is Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Find the podcast online at bookedonrock.com and all the major podcasting platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Apple, Amazon, iHeart, and more. Be sure to subscribe and give a 5-star review if you like the podcast. Jeff Copeland is the author of the new book, Love You Madly, Holly Woodlawn, A Walk on the Wild Side with Andy Warhol's Most Fabulous Superstar. By the mid-1980s, Holly Woodlawn, once lauded by George Cukor for her performance in the 1970 Warhol production and Paul Morrissey directed Trash, and the inspiration to the opening verse of the 1973 Lou Reed song Walk on the Wild Side, was washed up. But a chance meeting with Copeland, who moved to Hollywood with dreams of making it as a television writer, changed the course of both of their lives forever. This is the story of how an unlikely friendship with a young gay writer and a mature transgender actress and performer created the best-selling autobiography of 1991, A Lowlife in High Heels. Here is Jeff Copeland. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Eric. I'm thrilled to be here.
Congratulations on the book, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm curious to know, what did you like about it? Did it resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I mean, just the honesty of it, getting into Holly's life. I was fascinated with the whole process of writing the book with her, the ups and downs, the challenges, and then when it became something of a personal relationship with her, a friendship that you had with her, the struggles that she went through. And you used to clean her floors, right? That was the thing.
I cleaned her floor once.
Once.
But if I wasn't cleaning the floor, then I was cleaning the countertop.
You just did everything for her, yeah.
So I just, I would go over there, and it bothered me that Holly lived like a pig.
Yeah, and the sadness of that, here was this big star, and when you met her, things weren't going so well for her. And the decisions that she had to make ends meet, This is the side of fame that we don't get to read about often. So it just offered an insight to it.
Bullshit side of it.
Well, yeah, and plus your story coming from 40 miles west of St. Louis and then deciding, I'm going to go to Hollywood. That's where the book starts. There's a photo in the book with you and Dodie Goodman in 1981. And it reads, if you can't hang with the popular kids in school, then go hang with the Hollywood stars. They're more interesting. And that's just what you did. The opening chapter takes us back to your childhood days. You grew up in a small town, like I said, about 40 miles west of St. Louis. And this was a time when you were discovering who you were, your sexuality, and your place in the world. Talk about that. And there's a great story about your mom. She had a strong intuition that Hollywood was where you belonged, right?
Right. Well, first of all, I should establish the reason why I wanted to set up who I was is because I felt it was important to establish the reason why, where I came from, what my career, what I wanted to be a writer and what that meant to me, and why I would be so drawn to Holly Woodlawn in the first place. So the one thing I had in common with Holly is, we were both gay misfit kids, okay? And I grew up in a redneck community, and I didn't fit in. My father was the all-American, good-looking jock, and I was the acne-ridden, ugly troll child. And
And
when
he
I
wanted
was
you to be a ball player.
absolutely, and I was lousy at it, and I basically grew up feeling like I was his biggest disappointment. And so what happened was, by the time I got into the seventh grade, life got really hard because I was picked on daily. I was the runt of the litter. Girls made fun of me, boys made fun of me, and I gravitated toward old movies. I just discovered, back in those days, in the 1970s, we only had a handful of TV channels, and old movies aired a lot on television. And so I discovered these rags to riches stories, on the Late Show, like Mildred Pierce with Joan Crawford. You know, I just fell in love with Betty Davis and Barbara Stanwyck, Joan Crawford, and this idea that Hollywood was a place that I could escape to. I also, when I was about 14 years old, I discovered this. This is Rona Barrett's biography. It's called Miss Rona. And my mother had brought this home from the library. I actually just got this on eBay the other day.
Wow.
But anyway, Rona Barrett was this bullied little girl living in New York City. She was born with she had to wear a brace on one of her legs. I can't remember why, but the kids were very mean to her. And she writes about it. And I remember reading this when I was in eighth grade. What she did was she got involved with working for, I think it was Eddie Fisher's fan club, and that led her to becoming a journalist. And long story short, Rona Barrett went from being an ugly troll child, right, who was made fun of and beaten up, to being the queen of Hollywood, who was on TV daily, and she was gorgeous. And what she had done is she basically got herself a lucrative career. She had plastic surgery, she changed her body, and she corrected all the wrongs and made them right. And I thought, fuck, I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah.
If she can do it, I'm doing it. And I went to my mother and I said, Mom, I read this book when I was in eighth grade. I think it was probably about ninth grade, 10th grade, when I said I wanted to be an entertainment reporter. And my mother said, well, why don't you just, why wait? Why don't you just do it now? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, Carol Channing's coming to town. Carol Channing was a huge Broadway star, and she was always on television when I was a kid. And she said, Carol Channing is coming to town. She's going to stay at the Chase Park Plaza. That's where all the movie stars stay. Just go down there and interview her. Like I could do that.
Yes.
And I thought, what is she talking about? And my mother was very creative and very clever. And the thing about my mom is while everyone else thought I was this horrible little train wreck, she thought I was a little star, a little diamond in the rough. And so she was a floral designer. And I remember her thinking, there's got to be a way we can get to Carol Channing. And her idea was we were going to take a little soda bottle and put some flowers in it. And she said, you're going to give Carol Channing flowers in a soda bottle. We're going to have it delivered to the Chase Park Plaza. And she's going to think this is so cute. She's going to want to talk to you. And it worked.
Wow.
It paved the way to Carol Channing. Unfortunately, Carol Channing had a good friend named Gower Champion. He died. And so I didn't get my interview with her because she had to leave town. But what happened was I got interviews with, Pearl Bailey and Cloris Leachman, Bob Hope, all these, incredible people who, a lot of them were, Cloris Leachman, she was an Academy Award winning actress. Joshua Logan, he was a huge Broadway playwright and director and did huge movies with Marilyn Monroe.
What about Phyllis Diller? The story in the book about Phyllis Diller.
Phyllis Diller.
Page 23. Phyllis Diller refused my request for an interview, so I ambushed her at a local book signing.
Yeah, I was very fortunate because there was a publicist at this little theater called the Westport Playhouse, and I had gotten hooked up with a newspaper. It was called the St. Louis County Star. It had a huge circulation, but no one was reporting about entertainment. And so I tapped into that niche, and he started hooking me up with all these famous people. Phyllis Diller was coming to his playhouse. He asked her, see, hey, I got this kid who wants to interview. And she just flat out and said, no, I'm not doing interviews. I'm here for 2 days. I'm going to do my show, promote my book. That's it. And I thought, well, if she's going to promote a book and she's doing a book signing, I'm going to go to that bookstore. I'm going to stake her out. And I'm going to ask her at least one question. Because the deal was, when you got to the book signing, you wait in line, you were given a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, you were supposed to write what you wanted her to write in your book. So I wrote a question. I said, listen, just give me the answer to the question. That way I can get at least one quote for my story. I thought it was a very clever way.
Oh, that's very clever. That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah, right? And she was so impressed with that. She told me to just hang out, wait till the crowd died down, and she would give me time to interview her. So I did, but I wasn't prepared to interview her. I didn't have my tape recorder. I didn't have a notebook. I didn't have anything. I was just there to get a book signed. But I did, interestingly, have the good sense to bring a photographer.
Oh, is that Terry Smith?
Yeah. Terry Smith was another high school kid, and he came and he shot all these pictures of me, of Phyllis Diller. Well, I think I was 18 years old. I was such a novice. I didn't really know how to phrase questions. And I asked her, I prefaced the question with, at your age.
Whoops.
She had a fit. She had such a meltdown. I thought it was the most horrible thing I'd ever experienced. Because by this time, during my interview, there was a huge crowd of people that had gathered around to watch it.
So everybody hears this and sees this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was like people standing outside the bookstore looking in the window. There were people gathered around in the bookstore. It seemed like there were like 75 people all just gathered around, listening. And she just read me to filth. And I just thought, oh, this is so humiliating.
This is the last ever interview I'm ever going to do.
Awful. And I thought, you know what? I remember thinking this. You're just going to let her blow off her steam. You're going to let that old windbag go on her rant, and you're going to just sit here and wait her out. And I did. And so she went on her tirade, and I wouldn't move. I apologized, of course, but I just waited until I could ask the next question.
See, all the things you're saying, they're all the qualities of a great reporter. Right? Being creative, finding some way somehow to get a question in, somehow to get into a venue where that famous person's going to be. And then in that instance, I don't know, I think I might have just took off. But you had that presence of mind to just stay here, just wait.
I just remember thinking, this will be over soon enough. Just let her blow it off.
Yeah.
And go on to the next question. And act like it never happened.
Did you ever run into her again after that?
No.
Okay. I wondered if, hey, I remember you.
I never did. I never wanted to.
Yeah.
So once was enough.
Anyway, I kind of sidetracked you, but you were talking about all these famous people coming through the area. You get to interview them. And
I get
then
to interview them, yeah.
All along, your mom knows at this point you want to go to Hollywood, and your dad too.
Well, my mother, they knew I wanted to be an entertainment reporter. I wanted to, work either on television or magazines. I was trying to figure it out. Well, what happened was I interviewed Joshua Logan, and we're having lunch. This is amazing. I still, having lunch with this Broadway legend, and he's yapping on about all the fun he'd had with Marilyn Monroe making Bus Stop, and how wonderful it was to meet Greta Garbo, and all this, and I was just, it was that moment during that lunch when I thought, fuck, I don't want to just report on these people. I want to be in there. I want to be part of this world. So I was always interested in writing. And so I thought, well, I'll just be a playwright. And so basically, I was inspired to go to Webster University and study television production. I was trying to figure everything out. I didn't know. I mean, I thought I wanted to be a playwright, then I thought I wanted to be a TV producer, then I thought, well, I'll write sitcoms. I was just trying to figure it out because I didn't know what any of this really was like because I had no point of reference. I just saw what I saw. I knew what I saw on television, and it all looked like fun.
The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this.
I gotta go now, but don't you leave town, huh?
Somewhere around 1984 or 85 is when your mom has this intuition like, you belong in Hollywood. Like, you got to go.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
So I think you're talking about the time I was, she had this crazy epiphany
Right.
one night while watching the Johnny Carson show.
Yes.
Tonight Show. That was in the 70s. Yeah,
it was in the 70s. Okay.
That was like probably 1978, 79, around there. And she said, you're going to go to Hollywood.
Pretty wild. I got to give your dad credit too, because he was old school. Like I said, he wanted you to grow up and be an athlete. And he had this idea of what the typical son is going to grow up to be. But, he finds out you're into boys, not girls. And most instances, maybe a dad would say, I want you out of here.
My father became very distant. Like I think when I was like 13, 14, I was really going through that hard time. He didn't know how to deal with it. He was very mellow and he was very accepting. The thing about my father is his best friend, who was also his cousin when he was a kid growing up, turned out to be gay. So he had a really good gay friend that he never talked about. I mean, we knew him, but we never talked about the fact that he was gay and that he had a male partner. Yeah, we knew about it. It was just there.
I would just think that in a lot of situations, these poor kids growing up, they find out that they're gay and they get thrown out of the house.
Well, that's what happened to Holly, basically.
Right.
I mean, she had this. I didn't have that. So yeah, my father was pretty easygoing.
Yeah.
Holly's father exploded, and Holly was sent to a place called Youth Hall for troubled kids. Yeah. But thankfully, I didn't experience that. My father was a very compassionate, good guy.
And let's get now to when you meet Holly. You head off for Hollywood, and this would be 1985 when you go to Hollywood, right?
Right. I went to Hollywood.
And you're about 270 miles away from Los Angeles. The hot engine light goes off on your Plymouth Volare. It's a handsome kid in high school who you only knew briefly who would help you avoid being stranded. Explain.
Yes. Yeah, this is kind of interesting how that there I am in the desert. I'm pretty fucked because the car is overheating. And but when I was a junior in high school, there was this really good-looking kid his name was Bruce. And Bruce was about a year older than I was. And we met because we didn't meet in school. We never became friends in school, but we wound up working at the same hardware store together. And that hardware store was about 20 miles away from where we lived. So we would carpool. And he drove this old jalopy station wagon that didn't have hubcaps. I mean, it was just a wreck. And it was always overheating. And I remember him, we're driving down the freeway, the car starts to overheat, and he turned the heater on. And I'm like, well, what are you doing that for? And he said, because it was summer. And he said, well, because if you turn the heater on, it keeps the engine cool. And I really didn't understand how the dynamics there that make that work, but I never forgot that trick. And so flash forward, like 6 years later, I'm on my way to Hollywood and I remember him and I turned the heater on and I drove through the Mojave Desert with the heater blasting and it was horrible.
But you made it. You made it.
I made it. I remember having sweat just pouring down my face, in my
Yeah.
eyes. My underwear was wet. I mean, everything was wet because I was sweating profusely.
But you
I
made
did
it.
make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get there. This is the year 1985. And you grew up watching the black and white films, as you said, in the image of Hollywood. You know, the glitz, the glamour, the place where dreams come true. But that wasn't the Hollywood you experienced when you arrived. Author Simon Doonan wrote the foreword to this book, and he said, quote, "Our Hollywood, mine and Jeff's, was not a hooray for Hollywood Hollywood." It sounds more like a horror film than a dream come true film. Can you describe what Hollywood was like when you arrived at that time?
Yeah, you know, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. My idea of Hollywood was a Busby Berkeley musical. Okay. And then I get there and it was just trashy, tawdry, cheap. You know, its heyday was long gone. And in place of starlets, you had low rent hookers prowling the boulevard. You had gang members. It was just one shitty low rise motel after another. It was just awful and desperate.
And considering where you come from, small, quiet town, that must have blown your
It
mind.
scared, well, it scared the hell out of me,
Sure.
you know, because I was afraid. I didn't know where to go. I'd spent all this energy trying to get to Hollywood, but I never figured, I didn't put any energy as to where I would go. And this is before the internet. You know, I just figured, well, it would all work out. I'd get to Hollywood. I had $1,200 on me. I'd rent an apartment and then I'd get a job. Simple. What I wasn't prepared for is no one would rent an apartment to me because I didn't have a credit rating, I didn't have a bank account, I didn't have a California ID. So I couldn't find a place to live, and then I couldn't find a job. It was just horrible.
You could have very easily just called home and said, "Mom, I'm coming home. This isn't working out." But what kept you there?
I think what kept me there was I wanted that dream so bad, even though I was surrounded by, ugh, I just believed that it would all work out. And honestly, what did I have to go back to?
That always fascinates me too, is what keeps somebody pursuing a career in Hollywood or music. Most people will just say, "I give up. I'm going to get a 9-to-5 job. I can't do this anymore."
Surrendering wasn't an option. I had to figure it out. And also, you see, my parents had given me $1,200. They didn't give it to me, they lent it to me. I did pay it back. But the fact that they believed enough in me to give me this chance, not a lot of parents do that. A lot of parents say, you need to get that stable 9-to-5 job. You need to get security. Go to the grocery store. It's a good union job. You can get a pension. You know, this bullshit of going to Hollywood and, you know, that's like you're on the high wire. It's very precarious. You're on it. You don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. To think I did it for 35 years blows me away.
There was that point where there was nothing else for you except the pressure to write. Can you talk about how bad things had gotten? And again, what led you to hold on to your dream really defiantly at that point?
Well, Norman Lear told me, here's the irony. In St. Louis, I could get to Norman Lear. In Los Angeles, I couldn't get to anybody. Okay? It was...
Go figure.
Yeah. Yeah. And Norman Lear told me, write. You've got to write. Just write. Because I told him I wanted to be a writer. I needed, what was his advice? And he said, you just got to write.
And we're talking script writing, you know, right? That was
script writing. Yeah. You know, I think my first year in Los Angeles was the hardest because I couldn't get my footing. And I wound up sleeping on a carpeted floor in squalor in a roach-infested nightmare of an apartment with roaches crawling all over me at night. I mean, I'll never forget this. And I remember laying there and thinking, this is not as bad as junior high. You're going to be okay.
Right.
Seriously. And I just felt like I was being put to the test. And if I just hung in there, my mother always said, if you throw enough shit on the wall, something's gonna stick. So just keep throwing. So even though there were ups and there were downs, and every now and then I would have to take a job, 9 to 5 job, for about 6 months. During that first year, I worked at a department store selling men's sportswear. But everybody I met in that store, I hustled for contacts in the entertainment business. I always ask, so what do you do? I was just a nosy. What do you do? And I was always finding someone who was a producer. Oh, I produced this. I'm like, and I was like, oh, I wanted, I was always jonesing for a connection. I tried to do it in a polite way, but what happened was I would either get attitude. There was one person, this one middle-aged guy who gave me his business card, had a big Warner Brothers logo on it. And I was so excited. And he said, we should talk about you being a writer. I've got a film project that is in development. You might be good for it. So I was thrilled, right? And we went out to lunch. And here I think I made a great connection. We go out to have lunch. I'm in the middle of telling him about, the script I'm working on. And his next question is, so how big is your dick?
Oh my God. Jeez. Welcome to Hollywood, right?
Welcome to Hollywood.
Woo. Yeah.
And it was awful. And I was constantly fighting, I was always being objectified. I could never figure out how to get a mentor.
Things have, I would say, improved in that sense, because that's the way it was. That is that dark side of Hollywood. The stories that you hear, the Weinstein, Harvey Weinsteins, and that's a very sad thing. I mean,
I remember working with a casting director who would call in beautiful, beautiful men, and the only reason, right, was just to check them out. There was no heart.
Like Judy Garland, you hear stories about what she went through. Yeah,
it's just horrible. But you know what? What's really weird is, when I was a 17-year-old kid and I had this guy's name at the Westport Playhouse, Ned Boder, and he was the publicist. He was a good guy. He was just a real great guy. He was a straight guy, but he never, ever made me feel like a piece of shit, like a piece of meat. So when I was in the Midwest and I had access to all these people, then I go to Hollywood and it's just, oh my God, I got in that trench and I just groveled for years trying to, and worked and worked and worked. And I worked so hard and could never make anything happen.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
Can we go now, please, people? A good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow.
Holly Woodlawn enters the story. I'm sure by this point you knew the Lou Reed song. Did you know she was subject of the lyric, the opening verse of that?
I should be embarrassed to say that, but I didn't even know who Lou Reed was.
Wow. Okay.
I didn't know what an Andy Warhol superstar was.
Wow.
No Lou Reed. I was just ignorant about that genre of music, because I grew up, I was in the, 1978 when I came out, when I was coming of age, right? That was disco. I knew Donna Summer. I knew the Bee Gees. And I got sucked into that because of Studio 54. I never went to Studio 54, but I fantasized about being part of that very glamorous scene. And Lou Reed wasn't that. No, Donna Summer was that. So I was like total disco.
Yeah. Yeah. Lou Reed was avant-garde New York City rock.
I totally love Lou Reed now.
Yep.
But when he first came out, I wasn't aware of him. And so when you met her, then you didn't even know about the Andy Warhol connection at that point. I didn't know Andy Warhol made movies.
Okay. So you just saw this person. We get to this part of the book where, you eventually meet her, but actually kind of back up a little bit, right? Because the story begins with a phone call from your friend, Beverly, known as the Lovely Carol. And I think that's where all this starts.
Yeah. So Beverly was this beloved West Hollywood comedian. This is during the time when AIDS is starting to kick up. A lot of darkness. And Beverly was hilarious, and she brought a lot of light to that community in a very hard, dark time. And I was working. We were in the middle of a writer's strike. Hollywood had closed down. I had gone over to a major PR firm to work as a secretary because I could type. And I had hoped that perhaps it would lead to a publicist position. Because I'd been toiling in the production assistant trenches for 3 years, that was going nowhere. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be an entertainment publicist. So Beverly calls me up. She's working an event that night, and she needs someone to run a camera for her. Could I come out to Santa Monica and do it? And I said, well, sure, I'll do that. So I run out to the swanky party with all these entertainment folks. While I'm there, I get distracted by this strange enigma. I couldn't figure out if this person was a man or a woman. It was just a very unusual person.
Androgynous.
Very androgynous. You see, because Holly had plucked her eyebrows so much, they were very pencil thin. Men don't have pencil thin eyebrows usually, so I was like, was this it was just very strange. And I was fixated on it. Okay. I was like, wow, what is going on here? Beverly and I had a mutual friend. His name was Tom Bate. He was standing next to me, and I turned to him and I said, Tom, who is that person over there? And he said, oh, that's Holly Woodlawn. She's an Andy Warhol superstar. And he kind of scoffed, and I'm like, Holly Woodlawn? We never met that night, but she stayed in my brain.
She saw you looking at her at one point.
Yes, our eyes met, and she smiled at me, and it kind of freaked me out, and I turned away. You know how your eyes just dart away because I caught you staring? I'm not sure how the evening ended, but I never met Holly. But unusually, strangely, Holly Woodlawn stayed on my mind. And then the next night, I went to West Hollywood to the video store, and there was this little gossip rag that came out weekly. It was called The Hollywood Kids. And Holly Woodlawn was on the cover. Now, Holly Woodlawn on the cover was so beautiful and so different from the Holly Woodlawn I saw at the party. And so I cracked open this little gossip rag, and I read this interview with Holly, and it talked all about her history with Andy Warhol and Lou Reed and how she was almost nominated for an Academy Award. And I was fascinated because I, by this time, was looking to make my own little independent film. I'd been working at the PR firm for a year. I realized I wasn't going to get a publicist opportunity. They didn't think I could write. The boss just flat out said it. You can't write, you can't be a publicist. But the point is, I wanted to write. And a friend of mine who was a filmmaker had gotten some success off a script that I had written and he made. But all the glory was going to him because he was the director. I wasn't getting anything. So I thought, okay, you got to be a filmmaker. That's the only way you can make anything of yourself in this city. So I was looking for a star, and I wanted someone who would get me a lot of publicity. That's when I thought, Holly Woodlawn, you could write a movie for Holly Woodlawn and reignite her career and launch yours at the same time. So that's how the ball got rolling.
Kind of lit the fire inside of you.
Yeah. And I got excited.
Yeah, right. The Dark Side of Morning.
That's what it was. I wrote the script. Now, basically what I did was I looked Holly up. Well, I didn't have a phone book. In those days, you called information. I think the number was 411. Yeah. And the operator would come on the line and you'd say, hey, do you have a number for Holly Woodlawn? And the operator would dig around, and surprisingly, she said, yeah. And she gave me Holly's number. So I called Holly up. I asked her out to dinner, and all I had was a title. Basically, that was a recycled title from a previous drama I'd written. And so I took her out to dinner and I said, listen, I got this great movie I'm working on. I'm a producer and a writer, and you're going to have a starring role. And I basically coerced her into agreeing to be in this movie.
Yeah. And at that time, she's in her early 40s.
42.
42. Did she know Lou Reed? Did she ever talk to you about that? Did she ever say, yeah, here's how I wound up in the song?
Yeah, she did. Holly didn't know Lou Reed. Their paths probably crossed at Max's Kansas City. But because Holly was so drunk all the time, she did a lot of drinking, she did a lot of drugs, okay? And there were a lot of things she didn't remember. So my understanding is that Lou Reed knew about Holly because they traveled in the same circles. And he probably saw her at Max's Kansas City, and someone probably told him that's Holly Woodlawn and gave him the backstory of, how she hitchhiked from Miami to New York and shaved her legs and her eyebrows along the way.
Holly came from Miami, FLA, hitchhiked her way across the USA, plucked her eyebrows along the way, which you noticed, shaved her legs, and then he was a she. She says, hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side. She had to have loved that.
Oh, my God. Are you kidding?
She made her famous, yeah.
Made her famous. It kind of firmly cemented her place in pop culture, made her an underground star. The Andy Warhol superstar business, that was enough to get her into the underground scene. And,
right.
But Lou Reed brought her the world.
And it's sad because at 42, she's struggling to make ends meet. And you asked her, how are you making a living? And her response wasn't what you had expected.
Yeah. So, first of all, I was a real Midwestern square. All right. I discovered that Holly was a prostitute. She was a transgender prostitute. She hustled herself out as this persona named Kim. She took out an ad in a Los Angeles sex rag. I think it was called the LA Express. I can't remember. She had been prostituting for years. She actually earned a living in New York as a prostitute when she couldn't get film work. And I really wrestled with that because it just seems so sad to me and desperate. I was like, oh, God. But my grandmother, both of my grandmothers were Christian. My mother's mother, my parents weren't religious because they'd gotten enough of that in their childhoods. So they kind of like, every now and then we go to church. They believed in God, but there was no Bible thumping, okay? And my maternal grandmother was the beloved old maid Sunday school teacher who, at the age of 30 in 1934, got knocked up out of wedlock by my grandfather, who was a 23-year-old drifter.
Wow.
Who kind of rolled into town, went to the revival, and fell head over heels in love with my grandmother. Well, she gets knocked up. That's a huge scandal. I know my grandmother went through hell. I never talked to her about this. This was the big, dark family secret. But she had to leave town, okay? And she went through a lot of hell. And what I learned through her was you have to accept people. You're not the one to judge. You don't judge. That's not your place. And so when I was wrestling with this dilemma of Holly being a prostitute, I thought about my grandmother and all the people who cast stones on her from her own church, right? All the hypocrisy. And I thought, well, what would Jesus do if he was sitting here wondering about Holly Woodlawn? And I thought, well, he'd just love her the way she is. So that's how I kind of resolved it. I thought, who are you to, you little Midwestern prude,
Yeah.
And so basically, I thought, well, maybe me and Holly will make this movie and it'll do some good for her and she won't have to prostitute.
But then she took off, went back to Florida, and you didn't even know. You tried calling her, right? You called her she was living at a place in Hollywood, wasn't paying the rent, I think, right?
Oh,
she
God,
went back to Florida.
I had no idea that Holly was just going through a horrible, horrible time. She was in financial straits, and yeah.
She wasn't fond of a 9-to-5 job.
No. Well, she couldn't assimilate into that kind of culture. Right. And what I learned from Holly is like not a lot of people can. I could, and I would go into that role when I had to pay the bills. That's why I worked in public relations. For a while, I worked in advertising. But if I hey, listen, if I could, I'd stay home and write, plays all day or screenplays or whatever.
Booked on Rock podcast. We'll be back after this.
Short pause. Hold your breath for the dynamic duo.
Well, you track her down. This is the year 1989. You tell her, look, I got this great idea. I want to write a book about your life. Let's do this. And at some point, there's this suggestion that maybe she should go to therapy. If you could talk about that, because the book was going to get into some pretty deep territory with her personal life. And that was something that she kind of scoffed at that. And then you eventually find out there's a moment when she loses her apartment key, and that triggered something deep from her past, and she really lost it. Talk about some of the difficulties she went through as a child and as a teenager.
Well, when we first came together and we're having our very first meeting in the literary agent's office, I wasn't even associated with this project yet as a writer. I was just the person who was bringing Holly in. I mean, I wanted to write it, but I hadn't been officially brought on or hired. Anyway, the junior agent suggested that Holly go into therapy. He said, you might want to go into therapy because, writing your life story can drum up some bad shit. I remember when I was driving Holly home that night after the meeting, she just said, I don't want this book to be a woe is me drag. I don't want to go to therapy. This is not supposed to be some deep, she didn't want to make it like this big psychoanalytical.
Because she used humor to diffuse that too, right?
Holly had a great sense of humor.
And that was her way of dealing with that.
Dealing with all the pain.
Yeah.
Right. And she wanted this book to be hilarious. She loved the movie Annie Mame. She loved the book. Auntie Mame was written by Patrick Dennis. He also wrote a very funny book called Little Me. That's the tone she wanted. She wanted something madcap, crazy, outrageous, and just fun. Because in Holly's own story, there's some real dark shit. She runs away from home, like around the age of 15, hits the street of Times Square, and has to prostitute herself as a child prostitute to live. That's every parent's nightmare. That's horrible.
What was the connection to when she lost the key? That triggered something.
I'd come home for lunch and I found Holly standing outside her apartment door. We lived next door to each other by this time. And she was just like despondent. And I remember I just went up to her. I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I can't get into my apartment. I've lost my key." And I'm like, "What?" And she had an emotional meltdown and started crying. And I mean, sobbing to the point I couldn't really understand what she was saying. And the neighbor who lived across the hall came out to see what was going on. And I remember her trying to comfort Holly, and Holly saying, "You don't understand," yelling at me. "You don't understand how many times this happened to me in New York." And, I'm in shock because I've never seen this before. And I'm thinking, well, why don't we just go downstairs to Bob, the apartment building manager, and have him let you in? But she couldn't figure that. I mean, I don't know what was going on there. So I went down, got Bob. We got the apartment door open. Her key had fallen down the elevator shaft. And, Bob called the elevator company and had it retrieved. But I think it was, Holly never had a place of her own. Well, she did later. But for the most part, when she was living in New York, Holly was, surfing on couches. She lived with people. And she also stole from people. You can ask Michael Musto about that.
Really?
Yeah. He remembers Holly staying with him and then helping herself to some of his cash. Holly was desperate. And she had to do what she had to do to survive and to eat. Now, this is where me and Holly Woodlawn differ, because I would just go out and hustle up a job. But I think Holly, because of her situation, because of the way she looked, because of the drugs she was doing, no one was going to hire her. You know what I mean? I mean, we're talking the early 70s when she was, or late 60s, early 70s when she looked pretty haggard. I mean, her teeth were kind of rotting on one side and
Yeah, she sneezed and
oh, Lord.
her teeth, her top
Well,
front teeth just flew out.
when Holly and I first met, I always marveled at her smile. Holly had the most beautiful smile. And I'm a sucker for smiles. I love smiles. And I remember just complimenting her on that beautiful smile. And when she got dressed up as Holly Woodlawn superstar, and she was in her wig and her heels and all her makeup, she was a knockout. That was an amazing transformation. But one night we'd come back from a party and we were in the hall. She was getting her keys, trying to get into the apartment door, and she sneezed and her teeth flew out of her mouth and hit the wall, the uppers. And I was floored. I'm like, what the hell just happened? And I said, what's going on here? And she said, well, I did speed, honey. What do you think? I lost all my teeth fell out. I was horrified.
The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this.
Hey, I won't be long.
Jeff Copeland is the author of the new book, Love You Madly, Holly Woodlawn, A Walk on the Wild Side with Andy Warhol's Most Fabulous Superstar. You cared about her a lot. This was a friend. You wanted to help her. And you say, look, you're going to get a job. Let's go. We're getting you a job. And you found her a job, which was like the perfect place for her to work.
The reason why I had to get her a job is because Holly started drinking. I didn't realize Holly had an alcohol problem. Well, when that challenge presented itself, I realized she needed some stability and she needed routine. And I thought, fuck, she's got to get a job. And there was a place on Melrose called Wacko. And it was this quirky little gift shop where a lot of fun, cool people worked, like rockers, kids who were studying at the rock and roll school in Hollywood, punk rockers, all the people who couldn't fit in with the mainstream were working at Wacko. And I thought, this is where Holly's going to fit in. They're not going to freak out that she doesn't look like a regular guy. She's androgynous. They're going to dig it because she's Holly from Lou Reed's classic hit.
Yeah.
They're going to
in more business.
Right. And so I just hustled her down to Wacko and I introduced her to the store manager and he hired her on the spot. Now, the interesting thing is his name was Gorilla Rose. That was his stage name. His real name was Michael Ferris, but everyone called him Gorilla. And Gorilla was a former coquette in San Francisco, and he had moved to New York City, and he was part of that underground scene. So he knew who Holly Woodlawn was.
What is a coquette? Explain.
Okay, so a coquette, it was a drag troupe in San Francisco back, I think it was in the late 60s, early 70s. Sylvester, the disco artist, performed with them. And Gorilla, before he joined up with that group, he was part of another group in Seattle called, I believe they were the Whiz Kids, which was formed by Tommaso Duplanti. Gorilla was part of that culture. The Coquettes had their own little commune, and they would put on these crazy drug-infused shows, drag shows, basically.
Yep. And you had some great times while working on the book. There's a photo caption that reads, "Poor in money, but rich in laughter and good times. We were also hopeful and optimistic that we'd hit the big time. Memories that will last a lifetime." What stands out to you most about those days working on the book and waiting and hoping it's a hit?
The best time was after we got the book contract with St. Martin's Press, because you have a book contract, that in a year, this book is coming out. I mean, I had the pressure to write it. I had never written a book before, and we were contracted to turn in, 400 pages. So That was a huge responsibility. But having that was security. I still had to work. Holly still had to work, but we had so much fun. We would, our favorite place to eat there was Ruffalo's Pizza Parlor in Hollywood. We were always going there, hanging out. We were always hanging out at the French Quarter restaurant. And then when word got out that Holly was in town working on her book, we started getting these wonderful party invitations. And some of the best were thrown by Allee Willis, who was a major songwriter, composer. She did Boogie Wonderland was one of her hits. She did songs for the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack, Turn It Up, Patti LaBelle.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Allee Willis was a major force in the music world. And so we would go to her house over in North Hollywood. She'd be having these parties, and all these incredible celebrities would be there, like just huge,
Yeah. How many famous rockers were there?
I know they were. They had to be rock stars there because she was in the music industry. I know Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo would have been there because she worked with him. But, I look back at it and it's such a blur because there were so many people and it was overwhelming. I was with Holly Woodlawn riding on her coattails as a superstar, yet I'm working a day job at an advertising company and riding a lowlife in high heels at night.
Two different worlds.
I was burning the candle at both ends. And it was a lot for me to, we didn't have iPhones then where I could just start snapping selfies with people. But there are videos of Allie's parties on YouTube. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. There's a photo in the book, April 1990. You write, quote, "The most fun I've ever had in an airplane. Drunk and carrying on and posing for photos with the crew. The other passengers must have thought we were nuts." What happened on that flight?
Oh, that was fantastic. We had to go to New York because, one, we wanted to meet with our editor, Michael Dennany at St. Martin's Press. But also, we needed to it was a research trip because we needed to write 400 pages. And I needed more memories. And Holly couldn't remember a lot from Max's Kansas City because, she was pie-eyed. So what we did was I interviewed her friends. And oh my God, the memories they shared were fantastic. And so that helped fill out certain chapters in the book. But when we got on that airplane, Holly was not in a good mood. We had to get up extra early in the morning. She was just kind of pissed off and grumpy. And, stupid me, we don't have a lot of money. I'm trying to conserve my cash. So I smuggled a little tiny bottle of vodka on the plane that I was going to pour in my orange juice because I had flying anxiety. I was a nervous wreck. So the stewardess saw me spiking my orange juice, and she got real stern, and she said, you can get arrested for that. And so she confiscated it. I felt terrible and I was so embarrassed. And Holly got a little pissed off. When she had come back, the stewardess, I just said, "Hey, I'm really sorry about that. We're really excited because we're going to New York to meet our publisher and editor, and this is my friend Holly Woodlawn. She's an Andy Warhol superstar, and she was in Lou Reed. Lou Reed sang about her.
Always good to sneak that in."
Well, that just paved the way.
Instant, yeah.
Right. And so suddenly, the stewardesses, once word got out that Holly was this underground celebrity from New York associated with Andy Warhol, Lou Reed, they just started bringing bottles of Chardonnay.
And Holly must have loved the attention. That she must have been loving that.
Loved it. And I had my camera with me, little portable Instamatic thing. And the stewardesses invited us up into their galley, and we were taking pictures. Now, me and Holly were so fucking drunk. I mean, it was, I look back, I look at that now and I think that's embarrassing. You know,
Yeah.
nuttier than fruitcakes, running up and down the aisles, just laughing and carrying on, drinking our wine.
And then the book finally comes out, A Low Life in High Heels, The Hollywood Woodlawn Story. It's published October 1991 to much fanfare, a critical success. How was that experience, finally getting the book out and then seeing it received so well?
Well, that was fantastic because it was very validating. For me personally, I mean, I had been told for years that I couldn't write. You're not going to write for this show. You're just going to get coffee. You can't be a publicist. You're not a good enough writer. You know, and my thing was, I don't give two fucks if I'm a good writer or not. The point is, I want to write and I'm going to write, and I knew that I was good with dialogue. I had a knack for it. So to have that book come out and to have it be received so well, and we would get fan letters. We got some good reviews. We got one horrible review from a reviewer who actually singled me out, just ripped me to shreds.
Dealing with criticism is just one of those, you're going to have to deal with it eventually, right?
I actually kept that review, and I think you have to really grow from it, and you have to, I took it very seriously. I was very hurt because it was personal, but A Low Life in High Heels was written so quickly. There wasn't really time for a lot of rewriting. I did the best I could, right? Point is, it was a hilarious book. It made a lot of people laugh during a very grim time. And it made Holly happy, and it put her back in the limelight.
Sure.
So I achieved what I wanted to achieve, And then I'll tell you what really got attention was, I don't want to talk too much about this, but when Liz Smith wrote that Madonna was going to attach herself to the footlights.
Right.
That's when it went around the world.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
It's intermission time.
So you waited for something to happen, then you waited and you waited. What happened? Because you worked so hard on the book. You're there by Holly's side through it all. And like I said, you scrubbed her kitchen floor, for God's sake. What happened?
The big surprise for me was we had worked so hard to get to a certain place. And it seemed like once we got to the top of the mountain, the greatest success we could have achieved just suddenly turned on a dime, spiraled out of control, and turned into a catastrophic disaster. I mean, it was horrible. I was thrown under the bus, and Holly just spiraled out of control. And it was horrific, and it was just awful. My big frustration was I was the one who was there cleaning up Holly's shit, making sure she was sober, hauling her around, making sure that Holly needed a firm hand to keep her on the straight and narrow. She didn't need a drinking buddy. She needed someone who would just anchor her. But I think what really went wrong is the glory of success, right? Suddenly, her fame as an Andy Warhol superstar has been reignited, and you've got the most famous woman in the world putting you in a music video. Well, let me just clarify. It wasn't Madonna.
That's right. Yeah. That was Madonna's. Which song was which video?
Deeper and Deeper.
Right, Deeper and Deeper. She's in that video. Holly's in there. Yep.
But you know what? At the end of the day, is that going to pay the rent? Is that going to pay your health insurance? Is that going to put food on the table? I mean, how long is that going to last? That glimmer of fame. And I think what was really upsetting was there were a lot of Teresa Conboy, who's a good friend of mine, and she worked as Holly's publicist and then eventually Holly's manager. I remember Teresa Conboy saying that one of the other Andy Warhol superstars said, "You can't expect Holly to get a job. You can't expect Holly to work." My attitude is, why the fuck not? What do you mean Holly can't work? This is what keeps Holly sober. A job, responsibility, a sense of purpose, right? She's got to have a sense of purpose. I think Wacko was really good for her because it gave her, she was surrounded by these young kids so full of hope, so full of excitement because they're embarking on their careers and their dreams, right? That was very influential on Holly. But when that all went away and she's surrounded by people who just want to party and just want to be photographed for magazines, right? That's what, let's call them the Studio 54 crowd. Okay. What is that going to lead to?
You were a real friend, like legitimate friend.
I was the one who was there with her. I was there for her. I had her back. And
I think she needed someone like you to protect her from some of the sharks in the water that were surrounding her.
Well, that's exactly right. But you see, what happened was Holly, you know what? She rejected me. Suddenly I was just too much of a pain in the ass. I was too regimented. I was too square. I was,
They got to her, I think.
Yes. It was
kind of going back into the old lifestyle and says, I'm good. I'm good on my own.
Right. She fell back into her old routine of living with other people, not living on her own. Some of the people, unfortunately, weren't good influences. They were bad influences. They were alcoholics who should have been in treatment. It just got worse and worse and worse.
The film project that had Madonna as part of it, she was going to profit greatly from it. And she really didn't say, hey, look, Jeff's got to get his part in this too, because.
Well, that was the problem because, I went into this deal. I had a very specific deal. I'm going into this project not being paid and no guarantee it's going to get sold. It's all on spec. So I'm going to use that to my advantage. If I'm given this much up front, then I want so much in return. And basically, no one wanted to honor my original deal.
You wanted to write the script.
I was very upfront. The reason why I was writing A Low Life in High Heels is because I knew after writing the first chapter, it was going to be a fantastic independent film.
So they wanted somebody else to write the script.
Right. And basically what happened was I just bowed out. I said, okay, I wasn't getting anywhere with this. And it was a good chunk of money coming from Columbia Pictures. So I just let go.
With Holly, that created a divide between the two of you?
Actually, that did. Well, because I loved her. I loved Holly so much. And I was hurt. But I missed Holly. You know what I mean? I probably had some codependent bullshit going on. I still wanted her to be a friend. That's how I got coerced into doing that gay pride parade with Michael Greer. That was a fiasco. But,
people are probably curious to what became of that project with Madonna.
Well, you know what? Something terrible happened. There was it wasn't just one disaster. It was a series of disasters. Okay. That just, kept happening. But basically what happened was something happened internally, okay, with the production company. And the deal blew up. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't Holly's fault. I don't think it was anybody's fault. Shit like that happens. Projects go into what's called turnaround. And it just fell apart. But by this time, because I think it took about a year to even get the contracts, it just took forever. Holly was frustrated. Holly needed money because Holly wasn't working a job. It went to another production company for a while. I mean, it was just like such a can of worms. There was a deal with some really good producers. They had done Natural Born Killers. They were really hot and they wanted to do the project. And so we got involved with a director named Rose Trochet. She had just made a big hit at Sundance with a film called Go Fish. So Rose came on board, and we actually did do a screenplay adaptation. That just pissed Holly off. I mean, it was
Yeah.
such a mess. It's like, you know, and then it went into more drama, and it was just,
Well, you were even willing to collaborate with another writer,
oh yeah, absolutely.
but they
I mean, I
wouldn't.
wasn't, I wasn't an egomaniac here. I didn't want to, I just wanted to get in the Writers Guild. I wanted to launch my
Right.
career, you know? And essentially what happened was it didn't launch my career. And at the age of 30, after spending all this time and all this energy, all this bullshit, into trying to get this, book made, turn into a movie, I was broke.
Because even if you wrote, like you say here, let me write the first draft, I can at least get into the Writers Guild.
That's all I wanted.
You
Yeah.
know?
I would have settled for that. And I'll tell you what was just heart-wrenching for me is to see everything we had worked to achieve, including her stability and her sobriety. All of it just went to hell in a handbasket. And, to hear that Holly was broke and struggling and scrounging for cigarette butts in the trash, or, it was just horrible. She wound up living with Teresa Conboy, and she really, Teresa did the best she could, and Holly just shit all over her. I mean, Holly
Man.
went into a downward spiral that put us all through the ringer. But I never stopped caring about her. It's funny, it was such a magical time when we were living at Las Palmas and working on that book. I loved that time we had. It was golden. And I wrote Love You Madly, Holly Woodlawn, not because I wanted to celebrate Holly and pay tribute to her, but I wanted a record of all those wonderful memories. Because if I go down the fucking Alzheimer's rabbit hole like my father, I can read this book over and over and over again. And I might not even know who these people are, but I can laugh because the book's pretty funny.
Booked on Rock podcast. We'll be back after this.
I mean, there's like no way that we can just pause for a minute. You guys just go home and do your stuff, and then tomorrow we can just like continue.
It would have been interesting. I mean, I guess Madonna was going to play Holly's role.
Well, here's the thing. Madonna was being courted to play Candy Darling, but Madonna hadn't really, I don't think Madonna had committed to being a producer. I don't think I'm not sure if she even committed to being in the movie. She had been courted, and maybe she expressed interest. What happened was, I guess it was many years later, Madonna had gotten another one of my stories, a story about my childhood. It was called The Long Hair Depression. And she called me up on the phone and she gave me a deal on it.
Wow.
Now, see, this was the big difference, okay? When me and Holly were excited about the Madonna deal on Lowlife, for some reason there was all this red tape and we couldn't get the contract and we couldn't get the option fee. And it was just like, it drug out forever. But flash forward all these years later, when I'm working with Madonna direct, it's like, well, sure, here's a check. We don't have the contract yet, but it'll come,
And what happened with that project?
Went into development hell.
Yeah. That happens a lot, huh?
Yeah.
The movies that we see when we go to the movie theater, there's a long history behind from when it starts to when we finally see it up on the big screen, huh?
Right. Yeah. I wrote a lot of screenplays that all fell into development hell. And when I had to come back and look after my parents, I decided that I wanted to take all those screenplays and I wanted to novelize them and turn them into books. But the first thing I wanted to do before I did that was I wanted to write the book about my experience with Holly Woodlawn. For me, it was taking a really shitty situation and turning it into something positive. Because what happened to me and Holly was just awful. That should not have happened.
Her health started to decline. She fell on the sidewalk. That caused nerve damage and impaired her ability to walk. Her drinking, many years of drinking, took its toll. But you did have the chance to see her one last time in 2015. You heard she wasn't going to be around much longer. So if you want to see her, you better do it now. And you did. Talk about that.
So Teresa Conboy and I went to see Holly in her nursing home, which her friends had gotten for her. She was happy to see us. And we walked in and she said, "Darlings, I've got cancer," you know? And I mean, she was hilarious. And it's because it was a heartbreaking situation. We knew she was on her way out, but because she had so much energy and she was, I thought, well, shit, is she really going to die? Is this really going, I mean, is this all a ruse? you know?
Is this an Andy Kaufman moment here? Is she
Exactly. And then I went and saw her again the last time I saw her, and we spent some time together. But it was very hard for me to see Holly in a debilitated state because I felt that it was so sad and that it didn't have to be this way. See, some people just accepted Holly's drinking. I couldn't, that to me was unacceptable. If I was with Holly, I would have made sure she got in for treatment. I would have done something to curtail this. I wouldn't have enabled it. And that was the difference.
Yeah, that's the big thing. There's so many enablers.
But here's the thing. Holly ran away from home when she was a kid. So I think what was going on there was a sense of arrested development. Holly never grew up. How could Holly? Holly was a 15-year-old kid sleeping in doorways and hustling, turning tricks on the street to survive. And God knows what kind of horrible situation that was like. And I think that did something to Holly. And I think that in this day and age, when we have diversity and inclusion being thrown out, right, and treated as if it doesn't matter, I think if Holly, when I think about both of our childhoods, if we had grown up feeling that we were valued and supported by the culture, you see, if you're a gay kid and you're growing up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or whatever, and people are telling you you should be ashamed and what are you? And now I didn't go through that with my parents. Had Holly been encouraged and supported as a child to be who he really was, or she really was, because at that time he was a boy, I think Holly would have probably studied theater, maybe gone to college, maybe would have worked. Holly did go into theater, but Holly wound up a prostitute. And I don't know. I wrestle.
Yeah.
What would have happened to Holly if Holly had grown up in a supportive culture, a culture that valued people for their differences and didn't condemn them?
How do you think she should be remembered?
Well, I think Holly should be remembered for her wonderful sense of humor and her endearing charm. Because Holly, was lovely, just a wonderful, it's so funny because Holly was a wonderful person, but a challenged and troubled person, okay? And I just think that she should be remembered for her contributions to underground cinema. But I just love that. I loved her sense of humor and the fact that she wanted to make people laugh so much. And that's why A Low Life in High Heels was written in the tone that it has.
And till her dying day, she hoped that the book would eventually be turned into a film. Do you see a day that may happen?
Okay, so you know what? To me, that is just pains my heart. Thinking that if that happens, okay, I don't want to be part of it. And the reason I don't want to be part of it is because Holly is not here to enjoy it. And with Holly not here to enjoy it, there's no joy for me. You know what I mean? I wanted her to have that, and it didn't happen. And that's just crushing. It's just terrible. So I would rather see Love You Madly, Holly Woodlawn wind up on the Broadway stage. That to me would be great. But the whole Hollywood thing, development hell, that to me is just one more nightmare I don't want to be part of.
Hey, the book is there for people to read.
Yeah.
Is it still in publication?
Oh, A Low Life in High Heels?
Yeah.
It's out of print, but you can buy it on eBay for about $200.
Oh, yeah. Okay. What would it take to bring it back just so people can buy it anywhere they will get their books?
I got the rights back to it.
Okay.
So Farrell House, Christina Ward at Farrell House.
Christina's great. She's set up so many great interviews.
She's a love, and she's a big champion of Holly Woodlawn, and I think she's interested in bringing that out so people can access it at a reasonable price.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, Love You Madly, Holly Woodlawn, A Walk on the Wild Side with Andy Warhol's most fabulous superstar. So this is out now, right? People can get it wherever books are sold.
Yeah, it just came out.
Through Farrell House. It's on Amazon, but also visit your local bookstore, because if it's there, grab a copy. And if it's not, tell them to get a copy. And you
Please
can always
support your indie bookstores.
Yeah, you could search for your local bookstore at bookdownrock.com. And where can people find you online, Jeff?
You know what? I've got my own Love You Madly Holly Woodlawn YouTube channel and my own Love You Madly Holly Woodlawn Facebook group page.
Okay. You can send those links to me if you'd like. I'll put it in the show notes page.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Jeff Copeland, thank you.
Eric, this has been a huge pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's it. It's in the books.